Our first reading this morning is from Amos, the 5th chapter. Alas for you who desire the day of the Lord. Why do you want the day of the Lord? It is darkness, not light, as if someone fled from a lion and was met by a bear, or went into the house and rested a hand against the wall and was bitten by a snake. Is not the day of the Lord darkness, not light, and gloom with no brightness in it? I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Here ends the first reading. Our psalm reading is from Psalm 70, and we will read responsively. Be pleased, O God, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let those who say to me, Aha, and gloat over me, turn back because of their shame.
Let all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. Let those who love your salvation say forever, Great is the Lord.
But as for me, I am poor and needy. Come to me quickly, O God. You are my helper and my deliverer. O Lord, do not tarry. The second reading this morning is from 1 Thessalonians, the 4th chapter. We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have died. For this we declare to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will by no means precede those who have died. For the Lord himself, with the cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpet, will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will raise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up in the clouds together with them to meet the Lord in the air. So we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. Here ends the second reading. Please stand. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 25th chapter, beginning with the first verse.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to the disciples, Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out to meet him. Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise replied, No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves. And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the other bridesmaids came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he replied, Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated.
Well, there'll be no napping today. Everyone loves a good wedding, it seems. It's a time of great celebration, a gathering of family and closest friends all come together. It's a glorious time of love and celebrating the love of a couple as they make their promises of commitment and love for the rest of their lives. And it's a time that we look forward to. It's a time that we plan for a long time. I've noticed in the last couple of years at least, the newest trend seems to be to send out a save the date card. I have a card on my desk I've had for at least 3 months already for a wedding next June. And then there's always in the bottom of the card in the fine print it says a formal invitation to come, but save the date. And so in this case, I can anticipate and plan and get excited for a whole year. No, seriously. Some of them are really fun. So it's not too surprising when you think about the joy, the celebration, the anticipation of a wedding, that Jesus and the gospel writers use the wedding feast and the wedding ceremony as a way to describe God's kingdom and God's reign of love. It's a great analogy. There's many parallels there. Well, today in the gospel lesson, I was going to mention too, the reason this is so very important, the very first miracle that Jesus did happened at a wedding. That was at the wedding at Cana in Galilee. And does anybody recall what the great miracle was that day? He turned water into wine, and the scriptures point out very clearly that everybody was happy. And I finally figured out why that was. If you do the math with these big stone jars that he had the servants fill with water, it turns out to be at least 80 gallons. And it wasn't just $5 wine. This was the finest wine they had ever tasted. And of course, that made everybody happy. It'd be like 1.5 55-gallon drums of the finest wine you've ever tasted. Pastors love to preach on that at weddings because the whole point of that story is that something ordinary becomes something exquisitely special. Water to the finest wine. And so the implication is when you invite Jesus into your marriage, into your family, into your home, even the ordinary things of life become very, very special. So in the gospel for today, as we're plowing our way through these last Sundays of the church year, and Matthew is throwing these incredibly difficult, confusing gospel lessons to us, this is actually the third one where he talks about weddings. One of the stories Matthew tells, that some of the guests didn't have the right clothing, so they weren't let in. 2 or 3 weeks ago, the gospel lesson was about the king who invited some people to his son's wedding, and the messengers that went out to invite those who were invited got beat up, and finally some were killed. And so out of frustration, the king said, all right, just go out and invite everybody. So the invitation went out to the whole world, and it ends by saying the banquet hall was filled to capacity. And the point of that lesson was everybody was invited. Now today, Matthew tells about a wedding where there were 10 bridesmaids. What could possibly go wrong? And it says 5 were wise and 5 were foolish. I think that's kind of troublesome. I did a wedding 2 weeks ago where we had 9 bridesmaids, 9 groomsmen, ring bearer, flower girl, a bride and the groom, and then there was even enough room for the pastor. And it went very well. I mean, I've never encountered 5 foolish bridesmaids at one time, or maybe total in the years I've been doing weddings. In fact, I always tease the groomsmen when I do a wedding rehearsal. The bridesmaids, they line up here on the bride's side. You've got the bride, and then the maid of honor, and then all the bridesmaids line up, and they're tiered back. In the big wedding, we had them all the way down to the altar railing. So I get everybody in place. Keep your heads in a straight line. And then I bring the groomsmen up and I say, okay, guys, to make this real easy for you, Just look at the bridesmaids, and whatever they do, you do. So where your partner stands, that's where you're going to stand. And you know, if they have them to look at and follow the lead, it goes pretty well. But in reality, there's a lot of troublesome things about this wedding story. One is that it only talks about the bridesmaids. Where are the groomsmen? Where's the bride? I mean, usually the bride, for lack of a better term, the bride is the star of the wedding. That's why we even have the whole congregation stand when the bride comes in, usually with her father. That's the focal point. But in this story, there's no groomsman, there's no bride, there's no ring bearer, no flower girl. There isn't even a preacher involved or the priest, just bridesmaids. So that just seems strange. And the fact that they were coming in and that they had lamps, but 5 of them forgot to bring their oil, that's really strange. If you actually look at the Greek text, you find out that this word that's translated lantern or lamp isn't what we would envision. It's not like a handheld lamp or like a kerosene lamp. It's more likely what they often used is like a torch. And the oil would be to soak this torch in the oil so they could carry it and have light. The other thing that I find quite hilarious about this story is that the bridegroom doesn't show up till midnight. I mean, there's no way we're going to stand here and wait till midnight for the groom to show up. You know, I've never had a rehearsal start on time, but weddings usually start within 5 or 10 minutes of the appointed hour. So the whole point of this story seems to be the importance of being ready and being prepared to meet the bridegroom, whenever that might be. So here we are, we're only 2 or 3 weeks out from Advent. It seems to me we have an early Advent lesson here. It's about being prepared, it's about being ready. It's not about a wedding, it's not about the bridesmaids, it's really being ready to meet the Lord, because He could show up at any moment. That'll be the prominent theme when we start Advent in early December. John the Baptist, be prepared, and all of these lessons, meet Him when He comes, and be sure you're ready. Now, obviously, when these lessons come across, they seem pretty stern. Matthew is really a black and white kind of guy, the way he writes his gospel. This is the way it is, you better be ready, because you don't want to miss it. And the implication is always made in these Advent texts that if you're not ready and if you miss it, something bad and horrible could happen to you. It's really the law that just presses in and kind of takes over the whole conversation. But I'd like to make a suggestion to you today. If you've ever been involved in planning a wedding, how many of you have ever planned a wedding or been part of a wedding in your family? There's just a few details, aren't there? I mean, it starts out with save the date, then you've got the invitation, you've got the guest list, and then I love it when people make all these arrangements for the wedding. They've got the reception hall, the groom's dinner, they've got everything set. Oh, I suppose we should go talk to the preacher and see if the church is ready or available. Just a heads up, everybody, if you want to get married, get the pastor and the church lined up first, and then you can go ahead and make your guest list, arrange for the reception. You have to prepare the little gifts that are handed out at the groom's dinner. You have to deal with a cake and flowers and tuxes and dresses and a photographer. We require pre-marriage counseling here at Trinity, and we go through all these things, and they often come with lists of questions, and it takes 3 or 4 sessions to get all the details ironed out. And then finally I'll say, maybe we should take just a minute and talk about the ceremony. You want readings, talk about the vows, the service, who's going to be involved. It's a lot of stuff. It's very stressful. We want to make sure everything is ready. We want to make sure every detail has been tended to. There's such an investment in energy and effort to make the wedding ceremony a beautiful event, not only for the bride and the groom, but for the wedding party and the family and all the guests. Enormous amount of anxiety and stress over details because we want it to be as perfect as it can possibly be. So what generally is a 30-minute ceremony explodes into months and months of detail work and preparation and high stress and anxiety. I've come to the point now where I often tell families, let's just have fun with this. By the end of the day, this couple is going to be married and they're going to be happy. And that's really all that matters. So let's just de-stress and have a good time. And if the bridesmaids can line up perfectly, that's a bonus. And then the groomsmen will deal with them in their own way. But it raises the question, why do we go through all of this rigmarole for a wedding? Why do we make so much effort to make everything as nice as it possibly can be? Why do we go through our lists and make sure that for the bride and the groom, their wedding day is a day they will never forget? Why are we prepared to meet the bridegroom and the bride? Why do we do all of this? The answer is because we love them. Right? That's all it is. Everything we do to prepare for a wedding is based out of this deep love that we have in our hearts for the bride and the groom, especially if it's our own child or a member of our own family. It's done out of love and anticipation. And it seems to me that that's the entire point of today's gospel lesson and all of the Advent readings and everything that we're going to relive now in Advent. To be prepared and ready and have this sense of eager anticipation to meet the Lord when He comes is done out of love and anticipation. It's a wonderful thing to think about. There is no fear involved. We don't do these things because we have to. We don't prepare our lives and put our spirituality in order because we might get punished if we don't, or we might get locked out of the kingdom if we're not dressed properly. You know, these 5 bridesmaids that were foolish, you have to give them credit because they showed up. They were invited and they came like everybody else. And I'd like to think that in their haste and in their joy and in their anticipation, they were just so eager to meet the bridegroom, they came unprepared. They didn't even give the oil a second thought. What they wanted to do was be at the wedding, to share in the joy, to share in the love. What a beautiful picture. It changes everything. 10 bridesmaids came to the wedding, and they were all there because they were all invited. And so God bless you today as you consider that the kingdom of God is like a great wedding, and Jesus is coming, and you have been invited. What a joy, what a blessing it is to be among those people who celebrate His life in our world and in our lives today.